Welcome to the MBD Podcast, the show where we dig into what's actually working or not when it comes to scaling businesses with the people who've been there. And today's guest has been there. And I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself and tell you what he's been up to.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. My name's Ian Grace. I am Vice President of Sales at Ocrolus, Inc. We are a document and data automation company that works with lenders, mortgage lenders, consumer banking lenders, small business lenders, pretty much anybody that works with financial documents in any way, shape, or form to make their decisions. We do automation to make those decisions faster and do so with the right information that they need. So we've been around for about 11 years, growing explosively right now in the mortgage lending space. Signing about a new mortgage lender every week. So we're doing really well. With our expansion and growth.
That's awesome. So as a sales leader, what is something that when you come into these companies that you find that they can get help with in order that they can start really scaling?
I think more than anything, Jason, I'm gonna, my mentor, who's our CRO here at Ocrolus, Andrew Rains, something he taught me very early on when I started working with him was the value of metrics, right, and the value of RevOps. And so I think for us, and certainly from my headspace, when I can only make decisions, and more importantly, the right decisions on what to do tactically speaking, if I've got the best information. So for me, the foundation to any sort of scaling endeavor begins first with the metrics and the RevOps, right? So if I've got the right reporting coming in, then I've got the right information off of which to make a decision.
Yeah, it's so important to establish that data structure from the beginning, because if it's important, you want to measure it, right? I don't know how many sales leaders I've talked to, and I'm like, so, which guy on your team has the highest close rate? Well, it's that guy. Okay, well, what's the difference between him and these other guys? What's he doing different? How's he structured his call? Are his leads new leads, or is he just increasing, cross sells with current business? And a lot of times they don't know that. So like that is so important. Bring it. So now you've gotten to the point where you're like, okay, I've got the data to make decisions. What comes after that?
I think, once you have the information, then you start to think about it, you start to dissect it, right? So, I think a lot of it comes down to a few different things. So what do you have in the way of sales frameworks? What sort of processes do you have in place? What sort of, whether it's MedPick or it's gap selling or, whatever it is that you're utilizing as a team, right? I think that's first and foremost. Two, what sort of pipeline building, are you doing? How are you attacking that pipeline? Obviously we would all love to be order takers where the phone is always ringing, the email is always pinging. But that's not always the case, right? So I think it comes down to also, what type of pipeline building, whether you do so with SDR team, with central marketing and ABM and lead generation that way, the AEs themselves, creating their own pipe, right? So I think defining what sort of process you're going to utilize or combination of those three that you're going to utilize to build that pipe, becomes important. So, we know what we want this to look like. We know what our win rates we want them to be. How do we build the pipe then to sell to? I think, then becomes, and that can come down to largely resources, right? Do you have the ability and luxury and dollars, to support an SDR team? Okay, cool. Obviously always good. If you don't, then I think it comes down to, sort of the AEs themselves building that pipeline and blocking the time off to do so and building that pipe and committing the time, not just calendaring it, but executing on it as well. And then as a sales leader, ensuring that we inspect our expectation, on those things. And we can see it both in the activities, let's say in Outreach or HubSpot or whatever it is that you're using, Gong, etc. Or obviously we can see it just in the outflow, the lag measure, that is the pipeline itself.
Yeah. And, I think one of the harder things for people to do, right? It's easy when you've got marketing's working, it's generating leads that are coming in, but building your own pipeline. And that's something I think that every business owner, sales team, it's probably one of the more difficult aspects of the sales process outside of learning how to close, right? What are some of the techniques that you use to build your own sales pipeline? So if I was a new guy coming on and you're like, hey, here's, 50% of your times working on these leads that you've got. But the other 50% saying you need to create the leads.
Yeah. I actually sort of have a different sort of, oh, maybe it's a different sort of formula or kind of approach in how I think about it in terms of if you think about, I break down an AE's or any salesperson's time, Jason, to sort of three activities, right? You're either talking to somebody in front of you, be it either, Zoom or you're in person, right? You're either talking to somebody in front of you, you're preparing to talk to somebody, right? Or you're trying to get somebody to talk to, right? And the ratio that you spend in those three categories of revenue producing activity comes down to what you've got in terms of pipe, right? So if I'm new and I'm fresh, like you were saying in the example of your question, I should probably be spending 60, 70% of my week prospecting, trying to get
Mm-hmm.
somebody in front of me, right? Once I build a reasonable enough pipeline, then I have the luxury at that point. Now I've got those meetings booked. I'm booking, the 4 to 6, 7 meetings a week for myself that I can. At that point now, okay, I've got some time. I've got that time to prepare for those meetings and then obviously execute on those meetings. And then there's the snowball effect that goes into that, right? So if once you get cooking though, and you start to build some momentum, some sales momentum for yourself, well, obviously you may be spending more time preparing, or you've been spending more time in meetings and less time, creating that pipeline, less time in that, the getting somebody in front of me zone. But I think some of the things that I try to think about and instruct new AEs to do is a lot of that is taking those three categories and calendaring them in different colors, right? So, you know, red is getting somebody in front of me, yellow is preparing, and green is the meeting, right? So, if just thinking simplistically, right? But in the beginning, if I'm looking at my G Meet and my percentage of color time, most of the time is going to be red. But it's also that, like Akko always says, discipline equals freedom. It's doing it in that time, not just blocking it off, but actually doing it. So that can come in many ways, where you do joint calls with the AE, right? Let's do some of these calls together, or let's build some sequences together if you're using outreach and and things of that nature. Like, let's talk about the ICP we want to attack. Let's talk about your, if you've got a singular ICP, okay, great. If you have multiple ICPs, okay, let's talk through those. And what can we do to build different sequences to attack those people, right? What percentage of our time do we want to spend doing cold emailing? What percentage of time do we want to build, put people in sequences? What percentage of time do we want to, spend time actually, cold calling? What percentage of time do we want to spend on LinkedIn? Right. But I think those can change. Those percentages of time change, I think, in some ways based upon the industry or vertical you're selling in, as well as who's on the receiving end, who's the ideal customer profile, where are they in the hierarchy, where are they in in their company or their industry. So some people, but I think always some combination of those two or three, meaning email, personalized email, personalized outreach via LinkedIn, and then obviously phone calls, I think are always important, because you've got obviously certain folks. Jason might be a phone person. Ian might be not a phone person, but he answers every email, right? If I'm only emailing, I'm missing 50% of people.
Yeah.
If I'm only calling, I'm missing the people that are, let's say, conflict averse or call averse and don't want to talk, right? So you always have to kind of burn that communication candle on both ends and A/B test.
Well, it's just what you're saying. So let's say, for instance, we'll just use a particular lead. You have this one lead, you're like, this guy I want to talk to. And you go, okay, I got his LinkedIn profile. I've got his email. I got his phone number. Are you hitting them from all three areas, or are you dropping them into one of these funnels to try and reach out to them?
No, I'm definitely going to strategically, not sort of haphazardly, but I'm going to approach him probably through all three. There'll be a sequence to it, right? So if I had your LinkedIn profile up, Jason, a couple of things that I might look at would be, where have you worked? What industries have you worked? What things have you, if you've been published, if you've been on podcasts, if there's things that I could glean or speak to from a personalization perspective, right? What school did you go to? Did you play sports?
Hmm.
Whatever, right? I
Yeah.
think there's nobody, whether it's content creators like Lamana or 30 seconds or 30 minutes to President's Club, anybody that's been in the business long enough knows that personalization really is the difference maker, right? So I think first and foremost it would be I would probably send either a personalized email or a personalized sort of LinkedIn message, kind of with a foothold into one of those things. I recently saw the podcast that you did with so-and-so, Jason, and, I really like that you did this and this. It looks like you're doing that there. I think I might be able to help you with that, something along those lines, right? So, and then obviously I might call a couple of days later to follow up on that message. Or sometimes it can be inverted. I might call that person first, try to, leave a very quick, value added sort of, inclusive, voicemail, and then follow it up with either that person. Jason, I just left you a voicemail. The reason I was reaching out was, right? So, but in some way, shape, or form, over the course of 1 to 3 days, all three of those medium are going to be used by me to make outreach to you. And that's
Got it.
that's also, I want you, but I also might look around you too and try to multi-thread my way to you as well, right? So if I see you're the chief lending officer somewhere, one of the other way, if somebody wanted to get to my, chief revenue officer, well, they could try to get to Andrew directly, but the other path would be through me or through our director
Hmm.
of RevOps or through to, one of our SDRs, right? There's any number of people that can give you actionable intel,
Yeah.
on that person. So, and give you paths, decision makers, are in many ways are like my house, right? Like you can get into my house through the front door, you can get into my house through the garage door, you can get into my house through the mudroom door, you can get into the house
Right.
through, my back door, right? So it's always nice if I call them, that's the walking in the front door. But
Right.
sometimes,
Yeah.
it's getting to either their EA or, somebody else in the organization that's that back door, the garage door.
Well, do you have a tactic to blow a hole in the wall and get in?
I I think sometimes one good one that I've certainly seen work well is if you can glean from their LinkedIn profile anything of kind of true personalization, right? So here's an example I'll give you of one that worked on uh, for my CRO, right? To get to him, right? Is a good example of this in action. But it's taking the personalization and converting it into a gift. Okay. So in the world of today's internet, right? It was out there that our CRO, he's an avid ping pong player, table tennis player, right? So there's obviously great paddles. There's ping pong balls, brands. There's all sorts of stuff you can, in that world. But a very clever AE that was trying to get to Andrew, saw that, figured that out through his profile and his kind of web presence, and sent personalized ping pong balls to Andrew. Right. Then subsequently followed up with a message saying, "Did you receive, the balls that I sent? Just the blah 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 blah." And then it was
Yeah.
a door that absolutely got Andrew to respond. Right,
Hmm.
one, to thank him for it, and B, just as a sales professional, to say, "Hey, nice work here. If
Yeah.
for nothing else, tip of the cap. I want to hear more about. You've earned the right, to get to 15 minutes of my time." Right. So I think that, gift giving is something that we've implemented, and personalized gift giving, especially to some, both in thanking folks for testing or thanking folks for their, going through the sales process with us, even if they're, closed lost or closed won, right? So there's all sorts of points in time where it's appropriate and you want to show gratitude for people to take their time to speak with you, to give them, that small gift. But also sometimes it can be exactly what you're saying and be that sort of debt cord that blows the hole in the wall.
Yeah. No, that's awesome because that's great feedback, and not a lot of people do that. And I know some businesses, one of the competitors of mine, who are big on sending to law firms gift baskets. They send other types of items to get to the door. So that way they always got like fresh fruit there. And it's like, they're trying to make their way in. They got this. Hey, did you get this that we sent to you? Then their cold calling team follows up. No, but that's great. So now you got your team. They're running well. What are you looking for as far as trying to scale them? Like, how do you take these guys that you got performing and now you're like, okay, we need to bring on some other people to continue this growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, how do you, for me, I guess you would say the question I'd be asking myself is, at what point do you say, okay, we've got 5, it's now time to go to 7, right? Let's say
Yeah.
salespeople. If that's sort of a way that you're asking this question, like, how do I know when that is? I think,
Yeah.
when I feel that through a confluence of the pipeline that we've built and the pipeline that we are working, that they are now at what I would deem to be capacity. And I would say, healthy pipeline, if we think about it from obviously the metrics are always like 3x, your quota, right? Those are the sort of standard textbook sort of guidelines, but think of it more in terms of units, right? And so how many actual opportunities can any one salesperson proficiently and adequately not drop the ball on managing? And I think that number is probably in the 16 to 20 zone. And so if I had all 5 of my folks that all now at that point were managing 20, 25, 30, they really were at that sort of point, that would mean that there was that much road, or grass to till out there. As I started to see my pipeline build and rather my individual AE capacity of unit, of pipeline and opportunity to exceed and steadily stay, at that point of 25 or more, those would be some of the sort of that would be one of the initial signs that I would be looking for to kind of go, ooga, right? Like, okay, now it's time to do that. And, because then what you're going to start to encounter is like, yes, you want a pipeline, but I also want people to handle it properly. And if you're handling too many, you're going to potentially see your win rates start to come down. That's another, iceberg right ahead moment, right? So
Yeah.
if you're monitoring these things closely and you start to see your average opportunity unit per rep go up, your win rate go down, right? The devil's in the details. These are some of those lag measures. Like I said in the beginning of the call, metrics are telling us the story. So if you start to see some of those things, those are certainly the points in time, inflection points that I would be saying, now is time for us to add somebody or multiple people.
Right. And then, and you're bringing these guys in, and one of the big motivations in sales is compensation packages. Do you have a way that you structure these so that way, one, you're not overpaying them to not perform. 2, they feel incentive to perform, but they're getting enough essentially for kind of their basic living as they get going in the organization.
Yeah, that's a complicated one, right? Certainly there are so many ingredients that go into the bouillabaisse that is a good comp plan, right? And I think, part of it is, where are your people hiring? Like, where do they live, right? Where are they selling in, where they live, where are they selling into? What are the averages, band in your space, right? But then also, I think the key, one of my very early mentors, Michelle Myers, when I got into sales when I was in my early 20s at 22, she said to me about pay plans, she said, always remember this, that, you want to incent the behaviors you want to see in people, right? So I think that's always been something that's stuck with me. So for me, when I think about a good sales person, well, I want to not only sell, I not only want to incentivize them to sell now, but I also want to incentivize them to do a strong handoff and a strong sort of transition to account management or customer success, whatever department, however you're calling it, post-contract team, depending on what your respective companies call it. But I think, something that, like, for example, we offer with our plan that I think is very effective is, sort of, not only does Jason, let's say Jason sold to, Grace Funding. Well, Jason gets compensated on the booking, the contract value, but then potentially on upsells that happen within the first X amount of time, or those sorts of things. Because now, he or she is incentivized to work well with that account manager to keep the have things go smoothly and not be in a like, I'm on to the next one. I'm on to the next one. And I'm just throwing kind of, in some cases, that flaming bag of poop over the fence at my account management team because I only care about the churn and burn of this sale. But meanwhile, in my wake, is destruction. You know what I mean? And so
See that a lot. Yeah.
what's the retention of that customer look like after I've sold them? So I don't wanna, it's we over me, and you want to build that within a sales team. You want to build that in any
Hmm.
team. My son's
Right.
baseball
Yeah.
team, or your sales team. You want to build a culture of we over me.
And I see a disconnect in service and sales all the time, where sales is selling pipe dreams in a sense, right? And then it gets to servicing, and they're like, well, they said that you can do this. And they're like, well, yeah, you got to be on this account level, or you got to spend this much money, or you need to be, whatever the variables may be. And I see a lot of breakdown, but I've seen good teams where, like you're saying, is that there's incentive for one, the salesperson maintain a part of that contact in the contract, whether it's like a quarterly or semi-annually or something, but also they should be looking for areas of opportunity to do the cross sells where they can make additional compensation. And then you have your service team and you're trying to get them compensated. Like, well, you can do upsells too. And you work with the sales guy. So now they're working together to try and get the most out of the client.
Yes. And in our case, and it's as important in that model, we pay both, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's in no way adversarial. It's not. I don't have to.
Yeah.
If Jason's my AM, my account manager, and I'm the salesperson, like I don't have to blow out Jason's candle to make mine shine brighter, right?
Yeah.
Like we're both getting
And
we're
I've seen
upsell
that.
here.
Yeah.
We're both getting compensated, so we are truly both in it to win it.
Yeah. And if you're better at selling, like, hey, here's what I see going on, go out there, go out there and hook this and finish reeling this thing in. No, that's great advice, and hopefully a lot of people understand that because it is common pain points that I see in businesses where they're trying to do those handoffs. Because you got a great salesperson, but not necessarily giving the best advice, or what service can actually perform on, and not setting expectation where it needs to be, right? Because
Well,
if you don't set expectation, then it's an uphill battle.
yes, correct. Or I mean, as it's unfortunately so probably more often the case, as you may have experienced too in your sales career, is sometimes salespeople, overpromise. It's their they're not. It's not a question of they've set a low expectation. They've set the wrong or over an
Yep.
inflated expectation, right? So
Yeah.
it's an overpromise and under deliver model, and that's that flaming bag of poop you're throwing over at
Yeah.
your management team, and that's nobody wins there because the only person that wins there and this is where the compensation piece comes into play, is the AE in the shortest of terms, right? Because
Hmm.
they get comped initially on that closed one, but if 3, 6, 9, 12, whatever your contract terms are later, that person churns, or cancels
Yep.
because the wrong expectation or the overpromised, model was what was sold, then the company loses, right? So again, that's where the metrics come into play, right? Like, so
Yeah.
if you're
That's what I was going to say.
yeah, if you're tracking these things, if you're tracking, you know, net revenue retention at a macro level, great. Net revenue retention at an account manager level, awesome. Net revenue retention at the AE level,
Yeah.
now, if you're starting to see something go awry at the 10,000 foot view, like why'd we go from 98 to 94 over the last, 2 quarters? Oh, well, let's look here. Oh, it's not, oh, it's not
Yeah.
any
Well.
one, it's not any one A, but it does seem to be that Joe, has 63% net retention to every other AE's
Yeah. Hmm.
88, 95. Like, so maybe I should start to listen to some of Joe's gong calls. Maybe
Yeah.
I should start to, what is he saying? What's going on there? Because
Yeah.
there's certainly something rotten in Denmark when it comes to that.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So if someone's listening and trying to scale right now, what's one piece of advice you wish you had earlier?
Measure everything, right?
Yeah.
Like measure as much as you can, right? Understand, get very early on, as you're building a sales team or you're building, trying to build a company and go to market with a sales team, get a very clear understanding of what are the most important metrics to you,
Hmm.
Obviously, the key, the most obvious KPI are going to be what is your win rate. Obviously, your pipeline. Is it 3-4x your net target goal? Certainly, your net revenue retention, right? But again, like I think it's important. 4DX talks about the lead versus the lag measure, right? And all of those things that I just mentioned, net revenue retention, um, you know, uh, uh, win rates, those things are lag measures, Jason, right? So it's also equally important to understand what are the lead measures that are going into the oven to make that sort of sausage, right? Like, so how many calls should you be making, how many emails should you be sending, how many LinkedIn messages should you be doing, right? So we think about pipeline building. If I want to build 4x pipe, that's a lag measure. What are the activities I need to do to get there? So when you're thinking about the metrics that are important to you, think of them in two sort of sets: the lag measure version of it, and the activities, and what are the metrics of those activities that have to go into it to get what you want
Hmm.
out of it.
Awesome. And where can people connect with you or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can obviously look us up at ocrolus.com, Ocrolus, ocrolus.com. You can find me at igrace at ocrolus.com as well, as far as email goes, and certainly on LinkedIn as well. And always happy to have chats with folks that are looking for assistance with this. I do love these types of conversations with folks, whether it's podcasts like this or just helping, sales leaders in the space try to, I'm always about paying it forward. I've had people that have been very
Awesome.
helpful to me in my career, so
Yeah.
always happy to chat with folks.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.